Greetings, this is Ashnook. After some time, I was able to procure a copy of the Simon Workshop tapes, where Simon gives a lecture about the Necronomicon at the Magickal Childe shop. This tape is extremely hard to come by, which is why I'm recording it for all of you. Specifically, it deals with two topics in depth, which Frater Nero and I have spent countless hours sending responses and replies to. That is, A, the Watcher, and B, the Gates of the Necronomicon. This tape goes into the details of both very much. So I hope you like it and enjoy listening. If you'll give me just a few moments to set the microphone, the tape will begin shortly.
Simon Says Necronomicon, Side 1. Anyone considering becoming involved with the Necronomicon, that is to say, becoming involved in the occult practices which form the greater part of the Necronomicon, must first realize that this is, first of all, a work of ancient Sumerian religion. That is to say, these practices predate both Judaism and Christianity by thousands of years. The Neoplatonic veneer that some of the practices have should not distract you from the ultimate primitive quality of these rituals. The effect that some of these rituals have had on practitioners in the past, just in the past 5 years or so that the book has been available, has been similar to patients undergoing depth analysis, or something more like a Janov-style primal scream therapy, or something like that, because practitioners of this art are taken back to the ultimate core of their emotional consciousness. They are brought into touch with beings and qualities they did not know they were composed of. These Sumerian deities have not been invoked in literally thousands of years, as far as we know. The words and phrases that are used here in the ancient Sumerian language have not been spoken by man, except for a handful of archaeologists and scholars, in nearly 6,000 years. So we're speaking about a very ancient and possibly a very potent form of ceremonial magic. Now there are a few details that we've received letters on concerning the Necronomicon that I'd like to make clear here while I can. One of them is the herb mentioned many times, or at least not many times, but once or twice in the book, but many times in our letters, that is called the grass olearibus. Now this grass is really nothing more than the English herb nettle, Nettle. This grass or herb is available at most apothecary stores, herb stores, and like that. It also grows wild in Europe, in the North American continent, and in large portions of South America and the Middle East. So nettle is the herb that's mentioned, and a word of warning: if you are burning this herb for use in any of the rituals, not to inhale the smoke too deeply, as nettle is an irritant and contains certain slight toxic properties. So to be very careful about burning the grass and not to take too deep a breath of it as it is burning. Other points that have been brought up have been, is it possible to perform these rituals with another person? Must they be done by yourself? It's possible to perform the rituals of the Necronomicon with other people if they are very well disposed to what you're doing. You do not really require the presence of a complete skeptic or denigrator when you're performing these rituals, just as you wouldn't want a complete skeptic to sit in while you were undergoing any kind of psychoanalytic therapy or analysis. You need the complete cooperation and sympathy of another person if another person is to be present. That is not to say that if your personality begins to undergo very strange changes or bizarre abnormalities, that it would not be wise to listen to someone who is bringing these things to your attention. But during the actual course of the ritual itself, generally speaking, you should be alone. If you have someone else present, then they should also be, in a sense, initiates of the same mysteries. The seals for the ritual of the walking, which is the major initiatory framework of the Necronomicon, these should be on the ground or on the earth, preferably on the outside, in the out of doors. If this can't be done, then of course it can be done in an apartment or a house or a basement, let's say. But these should be drawn with flour. There are other substances mentioned in the Necronomicon which are also possible, but I think flour is the easiest to obtain, the easiest to wash away or get rid of after it's been used, and it's the easiest to draw the figures with. A suggestion might be to use a kind of funnel into which there is a small hole through which the flour can be poured. In this way you'll get a very nice, even, consistent, solid line that you can use to draw the sigil with. Now that we've gotten a few of those questions out of the way, I think we should go into the basic formula of the ceremony of the walking. You remember from reading the Necronomicon that there are certain preparatory rituals which must take place first. For instance, the idea of the watcher. Now, the watcher is not a unique kind of concept. Other religions and other occult practices have made use of something called a watcher or a guardian for many thousands of years. In this case, however, in the ancient Sumerian case, the watcher is a potentially hostile force in the sense that it has no morality. It serves only the master that feeds it. Should you, during the time that you're using the watcher, neglect care of the watcher, neglect the rituals important to maintaining the watcher, it could conceivably turn on you. Therefore, a word of advice, of course, is to follow the rituals concerning the watcher quite scrupulously. We can refer to the book, to the ceremony of invoking the watcher directly. On page 71 of the Necronomicon, which speaks of the preliminary invocation of the watcher, you will find that the bowl which you will be using to invoke the watcher must be used for no other purpose save to invoke the watcher. This is one of those requirements that I suggest you scrupulously adhere to. The bowl is called Aga Mas Saratu. The other requirements for the preliminary invocation should be observed. That is, the clothing you wear should be black. If you're wearing a cap, it should be black. You must have a sword of some sort in order to invoke the watcher. The darkest hour of the night, well, generally speaking, that could be midnight or any hour between midnight and about 2 or 3 in the morning. Naturally, it has to be far enough before dawn, and yet, preferably speaking, there should be no other light in your area, which means that if you're doing this in the city, it is probably best to be doing it in a building where you can extinguish all the light and draw the curtains. The conjuration of the 3 must be made. And many people have written to us asking for pronunciation guides. So in this case, I will recite the conjuration of the 3 slowly so you can follow it if you're reading it. The double S's are given a hissing sort of sound, which is a sibilant not uncommon to other languages of the Middle East. The conjuration of the 3. Is, Mas, Sarati, Sha, Mushi, Lip, Shuru, Ruhisha, Limnuti. Is, Anima, Ilani, Rabuti, Shima, Yada, Babi. Dina, Alakti, Linda. Alsikunushi, Ilani Mushiti, Iamas Sarati, Ismas Sarati, Vaidsmas Saratu. As the chapter continues to say, this conjuration could be made any time you feel you might be in danger, your life or your spirit. And the three watchers, that is the three cosmic watchers, and the one watcher, that is your own personal watcher, will rush to your aid. As you're reciting this, when you get to the last three words, Ids Mas Saratu, the sword must be thrust into the ground, behind the bowl, with force. That means your bowl right now is on the ground. You're inside a double circle of flour, which is quite easy to draw. And you thrust the sword so that the bowl is in front of it. The sword is behind the bowl. And when it says with force, again, I would do this with considerable force. Now there's a problem for those of you who live in a city or live in an apartment. You can't thrust the sword into your floor. In which case I suggest you keep a large flower pot or some sort of container with earth in it, strong enough to support a sword being thrust quite violently into it. At that point, the watcher will appear. Now by that, it depends upon your own particular gifts. The watcher may indeed appear. Those of you who have clairvoyant ability may see a hovering figure. Some people of my acquaintance literally do see a watcher, sometimes take on the form of an animal or some other creature. Others with clairaudient ability will hear the presence of the watcher. And there are still other abilities, the ability to sense the presence of an alien being. Now you can use the watcher for almost any type of invocation or ceremony, and it doesn't have to do directly with the Necronomicon either. You can invoke the watcher for anything. If you're following a course of magical initiation, for instance, similar to that prescribed by Rigardi in the Golden Dawn, or something thalamic, or something medieval, whatever it may happen to be, the watcher can be invoked for any purpose, as long as you're following the instructions. It is necessary to sacrifice to the watcher every month. If you have not, and you're about to begin a ceremony, then you must perform a sacrifice to the watcher before you invoke it. To invoke the watcher without having sacrificed to it would not be advisable. Generally, the sacrifices to the watcher are nothing of any great difficulty. Bread, fresh bread, is sometimes quite acceptable to the watcher, or anything else your own intellect may devise. Generally speaking, the watcher is not looking for blood of any kind. I would be very leery of taking clairaudient instruction this way, because it's conceivable that something else would be asking for this substance and not the watcher itself. So let us assume that you have been sacrificing once a month to the watcher. Remember burning the sacrifice in the bowl, the Aga Mas Saratu. To invoke the normal invocation of the watcher at any time, it is assumed that you possess something called the copper dagger of Inanna, of calling. Now I've received a few letters asking me what this is, and yet it is in the Necronomicon. There is a drawing of it, a description of it in the Necronomicon itself. For those who have missed it, I would refer you to page 114 of the Necronomicon, where you will see it. It's simply a copper knife that has been inscribed with those symbols. As far as any particular preparatory rituals or exorcisms, purifications necessary, these are not included in the book itself. I'm not certain then how it was meant to be produced, so I'm as much in the dark about the manner of its construction as you would be, except I would use Generally speaking, the instructions given in many medieval grimoires is a kind of guideline to how the copper dagger of Inanna should be made. It's a flat dagger, evidently, and the most important thing about it is that those symbols should be inscribed. Those of you who've worked with copper know it's a very thin, very flexible kind of metal. Therefore, I would suggest a kind of a thicker gauge of copper so that it doesn't actually bend as you're using it, like a copper bracelet might. And some of the words in the normal invocation of the Watcher I will pronounce for you. I will not read out the entire invocation for sake of space, but those who are following will see the words in capital letters in the book are foreign Sumerian words, and I will read those out as I come across them. The normal invocation of the Watcher starts with the words Ia Mas Saratu, Gira, Shamash, Anu, Enlil, Enki, Egura, Kur, Nar Maratu, Anu, Enlil, Enki, Ia Mas Saratu, Ia Mas Saratu, Ia Mas Saratu, Zi Kia Kanpa, Bar Golo Molo Nef Kia Shta. Now there is a formula you must pronounce when the Watcher arrives, and after he's there, and after you've given it whatever task it must perform, or if it's merely guarding the precincts of the circle, in order to get it to depart, you must strike your left hand on the hilt of the sword that's stuck in the ground, and pronounce the formula, Bara Mas Saratu, Bara. Now, for those of you who've read the Necronomicon or have any familiarity with the Sumerian language, the word Bara is used to keep something out, or to send something away. The word bar, the root of it, is actually also used, I think as was pointed out, for the word for temple in Sumerian, as though temples were precincts to keep something out, which is very much in consonance with Lovecraft's own mythology. And of course the final word on the Watcher is that he care not what he watches, only that he obey the priest. Now I would not leave the circle until I had pronounced that formula, because if you don't pronounce the formula and leave the circle, it is conceivable that the Watcher, which has orders to devour anything outside the circle, might in some bizarre way devour you. This could be through forms of acute mental anguish, depression, anxiety, all sorts of mental and emotional difficulties. Or it could also happen in some purely natural physical way that we have no way of knowing about at this time. But the best thing to do in using any occult technique is to, as closely as possible, follow the instructions, because they do mean something. They're there for a reason. Quite often it's not obvious what purpose these things serve, but we do know that they do serve a purpose that becomes evident much later on, especially if the rules are violated. Now many of you will be using the conjuration of the fire god as well, and I think it's only fair to run through some of the pronunciation on that you'll find on page 65 of the Necronomicon. And you'll know that in many of the ceremonies, the ceremony of the walking, you're going to be invoking the fire god. So I'm going to run through just those words that are in full caps, in full capital letters, in that conjuration. Those are the Sumerian words, and you may have difficulty pronouncing them. Remember that the pronunciation is basically just the way it looks. We've used an anglicized system of printing this. The original Sumerian language was printed originally with hieroglyphics and later with cuneiform. They did not have an alphabet as we know it, and the cuneiform script itself was what they call a syllabary. in that each character of the cuneiform script was both a vowel and a consonant, a syllable. So what we've done here with the language that was written in the Necronomicon, they had written this, when it was written at all in Western characters, was written in Greek. So what we've done is we've taken the Greek, we've collated it with what's Sumerian that we do know at this point, and the pronunciation that appears there should be a relatively pure pronunciation. So I'll go through again, page 65, the conjuration of the fire god, just the letters, just the words in full capital letters. Gibil, Gira, Anu, Gibil, Gira, Gibil, Gashru, Umuna, Yanduru, Tushte, Yesh, Shir, Ilani, Umayalki, Gishbar, Iazi, Iazi, Dingir, Gira, Kanpa, Anu, Marduk, Enki, Marduk, Gishbar, Bagibil, Bagira, Zi Aga Kampa, Kakka, Manunu. Thus the conjuration of the fire god. Now there's a lot of pronunciation for all of the various gates. The various gates all have a great deal of Sumerian language that's important to pronounce. And basically my instructions for Sumerian pronunciation, which are in the front of the book, should suffice. What I'm going to do, however, there seems to be, at the end of each of the conjurations of the gates, roughly a paragraph or so that seems to be in Sumerian, or in what they sometimes call in anthropology or archaeology, abracadabra, that is, words that are meaningless in any language that may harken back to an older language. I'm going to try to read those out for you and pronounce them, the pronunciation of those 7 gates, which begin on page 53, the invocation of the Nana gate. Remember, I'm just reading the last paragraph of each, which is in full caps for several lines. Page 53, then, the invocation of the Nana gate. It ends, Ia nam rasit, Ia sin, Ia nana, Basta ma aganasta, Ia kia kampa, Magabathiya nana kampa, Mashrita nana zia kampa, Ia mag, Ia gamag, Ia zagasthina kia, Ashtag, Karelios. On page 54, the invocation of the Nebo gate ends, Ia ath zothtu, Ia angaku, Ia zinebo, Marzas ziphornias kampa, Lajakas shintalsas kampa, Nibos athanatos kampa, Ia gaash, Ia saash, Ia kakolomaniash, Ia maakali. I'd like to point out, of course, that one of those words in that last paragraph is definitely of Greek origin, athanatos. Page 55, the invocation of the Ishtar gate, goes from page 55 to 56. It ends thus. Ia gushia, Ia inana, Ia erninia, Ashta pa mabacha cha kur enia, Rabmi lo yak zi ishtari kampa, Inana zi ama kampa, Bizama kampa, Ia, Beyi razuluki. The invocation of the Shamash gate, the top of page 57, ends, Ia uduya, Ia rusuluhi, Sag tamarania, Ia, Atzarahia, Atzarelehiyu, Bartalakatamani yakampa, Zidingir udu yakampa, Zidingir ushtu yakampa, Zishta, Zidaraku, Zibeluduk, Kampa, Iashta Kampa Ia. The invocation of the Nergal Gate, page 58, ends, Ia Nergaya, Ia Zi Anga Kampa, Ia Nga, Ia Ngaya, Ia Ngya, Ia Zidinge Ninya Kampa, Ia Kantala Makya Tara Kampa. Page 59, the Marduk Gate ends, Ia Dag, Ia Gat, Ia Margol, Ba Bonesh, Ia Marutuku, Ia Tuku, Suhrim, Suhgarim, Zahrim, Zahgarim, Ach Khan, Gaba Nacha Chakan, Naba Bilukuku. And the invocation of the Ninib Gate on page 61 ends, Ia Duk, Ia Andara, Ia Zibatu Ba'alu, Ba'lagu, Beldirigu Ba'aga Kakampa, Belzi Echa Echa, Azagbat, Bazag, Baroniosh, Zelig. That should help you with the pronunciations for most of the things you'll be using. There are a lot of other exorcisms and prayers which have a great deal of Sumerian language in them, but so far the hints that I've given you should basically suffice. What I'd like to do at this point is to go a bit into the structure of the Necronomicon, what to expect from the work, what to expect from your own involvement with the Necronomicon, how the work should be approached by someone living in this day and age. As you know, we're living in the last half of the 20th century. There's less than 20 years to go of this century, and of the millennium. So we are at a very crucial point in our evolution, not just because of the arbitrary markings of the calendar, but because of the situation of world affairs at this time, the collapse of many religions, the resurgence of faith in many others, the fascination Westerners now have with Eastern religions and other forms of mystical experience. We are in a position to make or break the planet. Now, the Necronomicon may not have all the answers. It's another system, perhaps among many other systems. But one thing it has to say in its favor is that it is probably the oldest occult system extant. It deals with forces, deities, demons, and powers that were acutely present for people who had just survived the greatest cataclysm of that time, which was, of course, the Great Flood, or the Deluge. The Sumerians came into existence shortly thereafter, and they had a list of their kings from before the Flood. There was a sense among the Sumerians of a continuity before a great cataclysm had destroyed what was known of worldly civilization at that time. The Sumerians believed that they had survived it, that they were somehow perhaps responsible for it. And through their occultism, through their religious practices, we here have a hint of people who have gone through what some people say we are going to go through within the next 20 years. We may be able to take a page or two from Sumeria and the Sumerian religion to determine what we've done wrong, how we can correct our course before it is too late, and what psychological, emotional, religious, mystical practices can aid us in becoming one with ourselves, in making peace with ourselves and with each other, before such a cataclysm comes and robs us of that opportunity. We have received many letters from people in the armed services, filled with paranoid warnings of the coming end of the world, of a coming world war, of a coming global cataclysm within the next few years. We think, whether this is true or not, that in our consciousness we seem to be in much the same place the Sumerians were just before their own deluge. In their religion, captured in the pages of the Necronomicon, we have a key to the mentality, to the emotional anguish these people have felt, survivors, after they had seen the rest of the civilization utterly destroyed. As we go on to Side 2, we will begin to examine some of the practices and to try to understand
Please wait one moment while I flip the tape.
on the Sumerian version, it's not necessarily between good and evil, but between two generations of deity, the old gods and their offspring. As the result of this battle, the younger gods won and created all known life from the blood of the slain older gods and the breath of the victorious younger gods. Out of this they created two human-like figures, two androids in a sense, and these then became the parents of the human race. According to the Sumerian epic, people were created simply as slaves for the race of younger gods. This was a very pessimistic point of view, perhaps, but by the same token, their point of view on immortality and life after death was equally pessimistic. They believed that people, when they died, went to a place of muddy water and desert and lived out their existence that way. Unless, of course, they had been warriors who had died victoriously and valiant, in which case their water would be only slightly less muddy. With this pessimistic outlook in view, it's difficult to see what the Sumerians might have had to offer us in terms of a positive spiritual outlook. And yet their practices, which are aimed at protecting themselves from demonic forces, their exorcisms, their religious sacrifices and practices, do offer us a glimpse at a bizarre kind of spirituality which existed then. In this pessimistic time that we're living in, we may sometimes feel that we agree with the Sumerians, that there isn't much else to look forward to. But by the same token, there are practices, occult systems, which can protect us from despair, from anger, frustration, disappointment. And combining the ancient Sumerian techniques with our own mystical techniques, our own mystical practices, after all, we have evolved since the time of the Sumerians in these fields, we can put together a composite kind of religious occult practice. I have noted in the Necronomicon that methods such as those used by the Golden Dawn seem to be rather ineffectual when dealing with Necronomicon-type entities. This seems to be the case. It seems to require from each one of us to find within ourselves some core of immortality, some relationship with the divine, which is our own sole protection against whatever evil fallout may come from the use of the Necronomicon system. Towards this end, I recommend, before taking on the Necronomicon, a period of recollection, as they used to say in the church, a period of self-examination, in which we try to come to terms with whatever it is that we believe about the divine, if we have any beliefs at all. We must try to understand what our relationship is to that which is immortal and undying. Perhaps it's a religious relationship. Perhaps many of those listening to this tape have a definite religion they belong to, that they believe in which case those practices which are dear to you, of your own faith, will indeed protect you against any possible evil or negative or hostile fallout from using the Necronomicon. For those who don't have such a religion or such a belief, then I recommend a period of going through something similar to the Golden Dawn type initiatory framework, a mystical search similar perhaps to the Abramelin religious operation, in which you gain some kind of control and communication with your higher self. In the Golden Dawn system, this was called the Holy Guardian Angel. Some form of higher self. If you're undergoing, for instance, Jungian depth analysis, some indication that you're undergoing the process of individuation, whether in dreams or in other experiences, might also prove salutary. Some token which you can bring back as a design or symbol from the dream world or from the depths of your own unconscious mind will also prove an able talisman against anything negative that may fall out. Remember, similar to Jungian depth analysis, we are here probing with the Necronomicon depths of the unconscious mind that have perhaps been untapped, untouched by our conscious minds for many, many hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. Atavistic urges that we did not know existed. By using the words, by reciting the Sumerian language, we will be vibrating in our own unconscious minds ancient instruments that had not been used in so long. They will bring with them images and feelings that are largely to us unfamiliar, unknown. They may frighten us, perhaps for no other reason than because they are unknown. Therefore, it is useful to have some sort of mental or spiritual protective device before undergoing this journey. Those of you who have undergone transcendental meditation may have a mantra that you could recite which would serve the same purpose. Those who have undergone any kind of Buddhist or Hindu or Tibetan initiation may have mantras which will then serve as a protective device that you can use during the course of this working. Some symbol that will remind you of the divine power within yourself that cannot be destroyed. So with that in mind, we should proceed then to the next step, actually becoming involved with the Necronomicon itself. Prior to using most of what's in the Necronomicon, I would suggest going through at least the first few gates of the walking ceremonies, which is a system of self-initiation. It begins with the gate of the moon, during which you are supposed to receive somehow some word, a password, which will enable you to travel through the next gate. It is in this way that the Necronomicon is a kind of fail-safe initiation device, in that I cannot give you the passwords, no one else can, and in fact no two may be alike. But these passwords will ensure that you have seriously attempted and actually have succeeded passing through one of the gates. It's receiving of that word that will enable you to go further. If you do not receive the word, something went wrong, or you have been judged somehow by yourself as not being particularly ready or able to withstand the pressures or the revelations of the next gate. In which case, do not despair. It only means that a further period of self-purification, of self-knowledge is necessary before passing through the next gate. It is not an ultimate rejection. It's merely a kind of postponement. There is something for you yet to discover about yourself. There is some experience that you have yet not gone through. Once, having gone through it, you will be able to pass through to the next gate because you will then have received the word. If you undergo the first gate, the gate of the moon, and you do not receive a word, put away the Necronomicon for a short time, for at least the space of a month, and then undertake going through the gate again a month later, or if you like, many months later or years later, depending upon your emotional response to the situation at the time. pace yourself. There is no need to rush through the system. In fact, I don't know anyone who has managed to rush through the entire system in only 9 months or a year. So take your time and take it easy. The requirements of the Necronomicon are very, very few. The symbols are what is important. The actual mandalas painted on the floor are what is really important. Those symbols, because of their asymmetrical attitude, tend to pull the unconscious mind in unfamiliar and uncommon directions, making the initiation possible. Periods of fasting and of celibacy preceding the ritual also help to increase a certain amount of subconscious tension. Now, as far as the calendar is concerned that you would be using, I understand that the instructions given in the Necronomicon are slightly confusing to some people, especially those instructions on page 46 of the Necronomicon, which talk about the moons. So let's try to get the order of this straight. First, you have to observe, before you begin the actual process of the walking, a moon of purification, which means roughly 28 days, an entire lunar period, during which you will purify yourself. You will have begun this on the full moon, the 13th day of the moon. If we start counting at the first day of the new moon, you will be beginning roughly on the full moon. From the full moon to the next full moon, you will observe a period of purification. For the last 7 days of that period of purification, you cannot eat meat. For the last 3 days, you may not eat anything at all, except to drink what they call sweet water. Now, sweet water could be a bit of a misnomer. In ancient Sumerian parlance, this would simply mean potable or drinking water, as opposed to salt water. Perhaps that's what we should observe this as, which means you will be on a water fast for 3 days. This will mean for many of you great hardship, in which case I would do this quite gently. If you're not used to fasting, then I would perhaps get the advice of your doctor before doing so. Also, on the last 3 days, you must invoke, as it says, in addition to your god and goddess, or in other words, in addition to whatever deity that you do worship, the 3 great elder ones, Anu, Enlil, and Enki. You'll find various types of invocations to them within the Necronomicon. Also, if you're in need of others, your local library should be able to help you. Works by Samuel Noah Kramer and others on ancient Sumerian religions would give you an idea as to how these invocations should be worded. Or you can make up your own, invent your own. On the night of the walking, which is now on the second full moon, you've begun your moon of purification on the first full moon, so now you're beginning on the second full moon. You have drawn the gate on the floor, which in this case would be the first gate, the lunar gate, the Nana gate. The area has been cleansed. It should be clean. It should perhaps be sprinkled with water that you have blessed and consecrated yourself. You must light the fire, remember the invocation to the fire god, and recite the invocation of the fire god, and pour incense on that fire. And you have an altar with perhaps images of your god and goddess on it, or of Anu, Enlil, and Enki, and some offering should be made to those deities first. Then you light the 4 lamps, which go to the 4 cardinal directions. These will be on the floor, of course, at the outskirts of your own mandala, which you have painted with flour on the floor. You will find invocations to each of those watchtowers in the Necronomicon. Then you must recite the invocation of the Watcher. Remember, thrusting the sword into the earth at its station. Then you must take the seal of the star, for instance the seal of the moon in this case, which you've already made, and whisper the name of it softly upon the seal. And then and only then you begin to recite the incantation of the gate, the incantation of the walking, excuse me. The number of times that you walk back and forth, beginning at the north, going to the east, the south, and the west, being equal to the special number of the star. You will remember that you will find the number of the star with each of the seals of the star in the Necronomicon. After you've finished reciting this invocation of the walking, that number of times, you will arrive back at the center of the gate, at the center of the mandala you've painted on the floor, and then you must fall to the ground, looking neither to the right nor to the left, but you must gaze straight into the air above the altar. Now at this time, this is the most crucial part of the actual ceremony, and anything can happen at this point. I would obey the stricture not to look to the right or to the left. You may be distracted by things you may sense there. You may hear noises. You may hear frightening sounds. You may catch glimpses of movement, but you must ignore these and stare only straight ahead with a fixed attention at the space above the altar. In that space you will see something like the gate being opened or some movement, and some messenger may appear and give you that particular word that you will need to pass on to the next gate. Once you have passed through the gate, you will be able to go through the gate any other time you wish with great ease, toward any purpose you may want. But at this time you must get the password first. After you've received it, for however long it takes, it may take a few minutes, it may be instantaneous, it may take a half an hour, or any other amount of time. You must be patient and wait. And then you will have the sensation of falling back to earth. Everything else around you will seem still. The sounds that you had heard, the slight movement you may have noticed or felt, will have stopped. Then you may rise up, give thanks to the gods that are upon the altar, strike the sword of the watcher that the watcher may depart, remember with that special invocation. You will be free to leave. You will extinguish the flames of the 4 watchtowers and of the fire god and the brazier, and then you will be able to leave the gate. Within 24 hours you should wash off the remnants of that gate somehow. If this is being done in the open air, it may simply be brushed into the earth. Anywhere else it must be washed off within that time period. Generally speaking, I would say sunlight should not strike it. Therefore, within a couple of hours after you finish the ceremony, you should cleanse the gate. If for some reason your invocation takes many hours until sunrise, and you're still there, I wouldn't worry about sun striking the mandala. And as soon thereafter as you finish the ceremony, I would then cleanse the temple area by removing the mandala somehow. But it should not be left for a long time. Now it is always entirely possible that somehow during these ceremonies you will be struck by some hostile or evil force which seems to have made itself present outside the circle, that you're not able to deal with and that you feel may be threatening in some way. This lack of confidence in the midst of the circle could be deadly, and perhaps at some point it is necessary to recite an exorcism to protect you might be outside of the circle. In this case, perhaps the best exorcism given in the Necronomicon is on page 80 of the Necronomicon, the exorcism for spirits who attack the circle. I'm going to run through that because of the pronunciation, but it should be easy for you now if you've been following the pronunciation guidelines already set forth. But I'll read it once through slowly so that you'll get an idea of how it should sound It picks up a momentum of its own, and it can be used as a chant, a kind of mantra, to protect the circle. The exorcism bara edinatsu. Zi anakampa, zi kia kampa, garu bara, nantar bara, ashak bara, gigim bara, alal bara, telal bara, maskim bara, utuk bara, itpa bara, lalartu bara, lalasu bara, akharu bara, uruku bara, kialgalal bara, lilitu bara, utuk chul edinatzu, ala chul edinatzu, gigim chul edinatzu, mula chul edinatzu, dingir chul edinatzu, maskim chul edinatzu, bara edinatzu, zi anakampa, zi kia kampa. Now, edinatzu is a fairly common Sumerian form of exorcism, and basically it just means go to the desert. The desert was perceived to be the repository of all evil spirits. Even in the time of Christ, it was believed that demons inhabited the desert. Even, shall we say, 3,000 years after Sumeria disappeared as a civilization, it was still believed that demons inhabited the desert. So this form of exorcism simply sends the demons back to the desert, to their normal habitat. Now, going through the initiatory process in the Necronomicon is supposed to do two things, basically. For yourself, personally, it's supposed to open up your mind and your heart and your soul to greater levels of your own awareness, to use 70s jargon. Basically what it's doing is it's making you a more complete person by tapping potential you did not know you had. You become more of a master of your own destiny. You become more powerful, psychologically, emotionally, personally powerful. You begin to exert some degree of control over what's been happening to you in your environment. Thus, it's supposed to make you at least more successful and more powerful. Happier, that depends upon you. Depends upon what you really want. But as far as your own potential is concerned, you are supposed to realize that using the Necronomicon system. You are supposed to tap hidden sources of strength, atavistic sources of strength you didn't know you had. You know, if you're very angry or you're in a severe state of emotional upset, your physical strength can sometimes increase to an amazing degree. There is that famous metaphor, simile that's given of a woman seeing her child trapped under the wheel of an automobile suddenly have the strength to lift the automobile to remove the child from under it, or the tremendous strength that patients in mental hospitals are reputed to have. In a sense, you will be tapping the same kind of strength by using the Necronomicon, because some of the rituals involved will tap just those sources that the mentally deranged, yes, the mentally deranged tap because of their dislocation from reality, or that very nervous and anxious mother taps because of survival. So you will be tapping the same source. You will be becoming stronger, perhaps not physically, or perhaps not only physically, but in a mental and an emotional way. But the other way in which the Necronomicon will benefit is that it benefits, in a sense, the rest of society as well. Because, in a cosmic sense, what you are doing is you're reinforcing a barrier that exists between a hostile force and a benevolent force. Because you have dared to, in a sense, descend into the underworld and to control it, to gain power over it, you have brought merit to the rest of the human race. You have assisted all of us in our own evolution by becoming an example for the rest of us. But you may ask, there are other things you may want in life as well. There are other goals that you would like to achieve. And this is true, no one can deny it. Perhaps financially, perhaps in emotional affairs of the heart, perhaps in your own career. Perhaps there are other things that you want to enhance through using the system. In the Necronomicon, beginning on page 123, we have the Book of the 50 Names of Marduk. These 50 names can be invoked after you've passed the Marduk gate. They give various types of powers and abilities, most of which were of interest only to ancient Sumerians, things like agriculture or stopping floods or starting rain or things of that nature. Others perhaps useful even today in protecting yourself against your enemies or in gaining some sort of wealth or knowledge of hidden treasure. And these basically are understood as metaphors for other things, spiritual things, as psychological symbols. But they can also be used in a very real way. Those of you who've seen my Necronomicon report, which has been available for the last couple of months, will know that these 50 names of Marduk can be translated into everyday needs. I would recommend that you look for the Necronomicon report, which would give you instructions as to how to use these 50 names in a modest kind of ritual. Even if you've not passed through all of the gates leading up to and including Marduk, these 50 names can be useful as talismanic forces. Of course, if you've passed through all of the gates, then they become that much more personal and that much more powerful. But for those of you who find the Necronomicon system a bit too intimidating to go through, you may find that the system outlined in the Necronomicon report is a bit more to your liking. It's certainly quite simple. It does involve the recitation of some Sumerian phrases because these are trigger words. These are words of power that will unleash certain abilities that, again, you were not aware that you had. Therefore, the Sumerian language is important to this system, and the Necronomicon cannot really be processed without it. So I suggest you spend some time in practicing and mastering the pronunciation, which is really quite simple. It's not as difficult as, say, French might be, or any of the other languages which involve different values for letters, for consonants and for vowels. You'll find that basically what we've done in the Necronomicon is given you an easy way to pronounce these words. If you pronounce them slowly, syllable by syllable, you'll find that eventually it comes quite easy. And for those who wish to merely increase their own psychic abilities, spiritual powers, I would suggest once a month, or perhaps even once a week, to read through the Magan text. The Magan text is in the Necronomicon. It is, as I said, a kind of rewording of the Anuma Elish of the Sumerians. It begins on page 154 in the Necronomicon, and it details first the conflict between Marduk and the Ancient Ones, and then it goes into, in a second part, the descent of Inanna into the underworld. These are two myths which may not have to be taken literally, but suggestively and figuratively, of a kind of psychological process that we all go through. And I suggest that at times when you are feeling depressed, and at times when it seems that nothing is working, to simply take the time to sit someplace comfortably and to read through the Magan text. This will show you, eventually, that there are many similes, many points of similarity between your own life and a kind of great cosmic play or theater that is taking place, in which you also play a part. You will find that much of your own life parallels what is happening in the Magan text. And for that reason, I suggest a rereading of this at any time you feel depressed or anxious, but also to gain a kind of psychic power. Reading of this once a week or once a month over a period of time will strengthen you, will strengthen your resolve, and will strengthen your spirit as well. You will find that it is a source of inspiration. You will find certain things in your surroundings begin to bear this out. You will find reinforcement in a lot of what you experience just from day to day, just in dealing with other people, and also in dealing with your own dreams. You will find that images from the Necronomicon will appear in your dreams, and once this happens, you will know exactly what is happening in your unconscious mind by comparing the dream characters to the characters in the Necronomicon. A last word. In using any occult system, the Necronomicon included, it is always wise to keep a record of what you do. This is important because as you progress later on in this subject, you will find yourself occasionally obsessed with self-doubt. At that point, it's always good to go back to your diary to see exactly what you've gone through in the past, what you did experience, and the successes that you did have, as well as the failures, which might be very instructive and which may fall into a pattern. If you have any further questions, I suggest you write to me, Simon, care of Magickal Childe Bookstore, at 35 West 19th Street in New York. Zip code is 10011. Address them to Simon, and when possible, I will try to get back to you with an answer. Until then, good luck with the Necronomicon, and good hunting.
I would like to thank everyone for listening in to the Simon Necronomicon tape. Two notes that I would like to make. One is that when Simon speaks of the Necronomicon report, the Necronomicon report is simply an earlier version of the Necronomicon spellbook. It's the exact same book. Two, the address he just gave is of course invalid because the Magickal Childe shop closed down quite some time ago. On that note, though, if you do have any questions, you can contact either myself or Fred Nero, and we'll be happy to get back to you. Thank you.